quick little rundown. I used to watch Yu-Gi-Oh when I was a little kid. Really cool. I used to have one of those. What are the? Maybe you know what they're called. Like you used to put it on your wrist and it would like.
Oh, the dual disc.
I used to have one of those and I thought it was the sickest person on the planet. I don't know where it is right now, but I wish I still had it.
I know where mine is. It's in the local dumpster because my sister sat on it and broke it in half.
Aren't they worth like a lot?
Yeah, they're worth like a ton, yeah. So I'm still pretty steamed about that.
Other than that though, I played a couple of games. I know what Exodia is, and my favorite character from the show was Weedle.
Weevil.
Weevil, that's his name. Yeah, dude, that guy's voice is my favorite thing I've ever heard in my life.
Sorry, Yugi, I'm gonna kill you.
So you're gonna have to go through, I guess, the basics of Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah, of course, obviously, what I'm going through, you could ask like any question about like a card or like how mechanics work, and like I'll do my best to answer it. But the general idea of how Yu-Gi-Oh works is that before the game starts, there's a coin toss, a die roll, whatever. The winner gets to decide the turn player. So it's not like in Hearthstone where it's random. You get a 5-card hand. You don't.
Oh.
Neither player can mulligan, and the going first player. They do not get to draw or attack on the first turn. There are 5 phases in a turn, but all you need to know is that there's a summoning phase called the main phase, there's a battle phase where cards can attack only in that phase, and then there's like a second summoning phase, and then like that's basically it. There isn't a resource system. There's no resource system whatsoever. There's no mana, no lands, just pure gas. So there's no like real restriction on what cards you can activate in a turn or whatever. If you can activate a card, you can activate a card as long as it's legal to do so.
Okay.
When it comes to summoning monsters, you can do what's called a normal summon, and you can only do that once per turn. Higher leveled monsters, you need to tribute up to 2 monsters to normal summon them, or 1, depends on the card. You can special summon, which unless stated otherwise, you can do as many times as you want per turn. It's just literally infinite. And there is no summoning sickness, so that means like as soon as a card comes into play, outside of like the first turn, or a card effects preventing attacks, you have to attack all of your opponent's monsters and clear their board before going face. And players have a life total of 8,000, and once they hit 0, the other player wins. I should probably mention that a Yu-Gi-Oh deck is minimum 40, maximum 60.
That was a lot.
Don't worry, just think of it as just like slightly faster Hearthstone.
All right.
Right.
I'll trust you.
So first card on the list, Painful Choice.
Okay, so this is a spell card. I do know that spell cards can be placed face down, right? Isn't that the case? I gotta double check everything.
Yeah, but this is like a spell card that's sort of designed to just be activated straight up.
Painful Choice. Select 5 cards from your deck and show them to your opponent. Your opponent selects 1 card among them, add that card to your hand, and discard the remaining cards to your graveyard. The graveyard is a real mechanic. Like Hearthstone doesn't really have a graveyard mechanic, but can you get cards back from your graveyard or no?
The best way to describe the graveyard in Yu-Gi-Oh is just basically you treat it as a second hand. The graveyard is very, very important in Yu-Gi-Oh. There are a ton of effects that interact in the graveyard, whether you could like bring back stuff, activate stuff, etc.
So the interesting about this is that you could select 5 cards that are just all bad, and then just your opponent gets to pick one. You basically draw 1 for 1, you're cycling, but you lose 4 cards from your deck, which is arguably not that bad either, depending on what cards you pick. You could go through any card in your deck, right? Like, could you see the order that your cards are in as well?
It's not like you get to stack your deck. You have to shuffle like whenever you take a look at your deck off of like a search.
Oh, okay, you have to shuffle. Okay. I did not know you have to shuffle because I was like, that information is actually insane.
Yeah, just straight up just stack your deck while you're at it.
I feel like this is bad. I don't know why I would want to do this, because you're letting your opponent pick the card for you, which in most cases I would imagine would be the worst case scenario, depending on like what the context of the board is or what the matchup is. But like, I wouldn't run this card in Hearthstone. I think this is pretty bad.
So this card is arguably the best spell card ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Fuck!
So this card, basically, you could basically just read it as send any 4 cards you want to the graveyard. And like what I said earlier about the graveyard being a second hand, basically if you really wanted to, you could put 4 searchers in the graveyard, like 4 cards that search for like cards that revive other cards while they're in the graveyard, monsters that bring themselves back, monsters that have effects when they're sent to the graveyard. And your opponent kind of just gets pigeonholed into, even though they're giving you the quote-unquote worst one, you just load up your graveyard so much at a certain point that they realistically can't interact with you at that point.
I guess I'm really underestimating how powerful the graveyard is.
The graveyard is very, very good.
In Hearthstone, maybe this card would see more play because it's like thinning your deck, but because we don't have a graveyard, like, it's hard to emphasize how powerful that actually is. But this card feels like it's not that great, and at least from a Hearthstone perspective. But it's interesting that you say this is the best, one of the best spells ever printed. Oh man, that's not how you want to start this.
It's okay, it's okay. We got a lot more. I'm sure you'll get them. We've all heard of Pot of Greed, but what about Pot of Desires?
Banish 10 cards from the top of your deck face down. Draw 2 cards, and you only activate one Pot of Desires per turn. Oh my god, dude, what? I learned this from Magic. I'm gonna imagine it translate 1-to-1. If you banish, the cards don't actually go to your graveyard. They're just gone from the game.
Yeah, they just go to like a separate pile where like 99% of the time you can never touch them again.
Wow, what would you want this in? Does Yu-Gi-Oh have aggressive style decks? I think so, right?
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh is a very, very fast-paced game.
Okay, so banishing 10 cards is like almost negligible at this point. You could almost just think of it as banishing the bottom 10 cards of your deck. So it's almost like draw 2 just to ban 10 cards you'll never see anyways. How relevant is that though for you? God, this is, God. After the first card, I'm gonna question myself every single time now.
You'll be okay.
I think this is good. Oh God, I would imagine this is good in the right deck. Like banishing 10 cards may seem like it's awful, but at the same time, just getting rid of those 10 cards might actually work towards your win condition. You know what? I'm going to say average because this card could be really good. It could also just be probably bad, but I think most of the time it leans to just being on the better side.
I'd say your analysis is very spot on. In decks that can utilize this, or decks that run just like multiple copies of everything, decks that are like very, very consistent, because you're in Yu-Gi-Oh! You could play up to 3 copies of a card, unlike in Hearthstone, we could only play 2. Pot of Desires is basically one of those cards where if you can slot it into a deck, it is basically just a free +1. And like the cards you banish 99% of the time, you just won't really care because the +1's enough to just sort of carry you over the finish line. But in certain other decks that have very critical engine requirements, like cards you can't really banish that you really need for like a combo, Pot of Desires isn't really played in those sort of decks.
All right, hell yeah, woo!
All right, 1 for 2, so far so good.
I'm more scared for creatures than I am spells, I'm gonna be honest.
Funnily enough, we got a creature next up on the list. We've got Exodia, the Forbidden One.
You just like win the, you just win the game if you have every piece. The question is like, actually in context of a Yu-Gi-Oh game though, I don't know how good it is. You said this is a very fast game. This might take you a while because, okay, so you could run multiple copies of like the right leg and the left leg and all that stuff, right?
Actually, each piece of Exodia, including the head, is actually 1 per deck. It's limited.
Oh, okay, then this has to be absolutely garbage.
Is that your final answer?
Having one-ofs in a deck that you have to find all of them. Maybe you have another win condition besides this, but I would imagine if you're putting Exodia in your deck, that's going to be your win condition. So you're probably going to draw towards that because you just win the game. Like what else would you want to do? But like, because it's one, it's probably a lot harder to find each individual piece. If it had multiple of each copy of each limb, it would be better, right? So, but you also just said to me that Yu-Gi-Oh is a very fast-paced game, so I think this card's bad. Like, it's probably like the coolest card ever printed, maybe, but I think it's bad.
Yeah, this card is absolutely miserable by 2022 standards. Funnily enough, in like very early Yu-Gi-Oh, this Exodia was really, really good because like the game was just so incredibly slow, and it's had stints here and there. It actually had a top 8 finish at Worlds at one point, but that was very, very long ago. And when you think about Yu-Gi-Oh decks now, you can theoretically turbo through your entire deck, but if you're just putting 5 bricks in your deck that basically just do nothing until you draw all 5, even in like a 40 card deck, like that's just something you don't really want to build your deck around.
The second you told me that Yu-Gi-Oh is a fast-paced game, this would never see play. Like in Hearthstone, this probably wouldn't see play. It would take too long.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know. In Hearthstone, this actually might actually be good enough. 5 individual pieces just to win the game. Yeah, I probably would see it played in Hearthstone. Hearthstone, I think there's a little bit more time if you build your deck around it.
Next, we've got this. This is a field spell.
Oh my god, the text on this card is more than any other card in Hearthstone. Okay, hold on.
I'm gonna feel really bad for you for some of the other ones.
What's the main difference between this and like a regular spell? Because you said this is a field spell.
Field spells have a designated zone where they sit on the playfield.
Like behind the creatures, right?
Yeah, basically just treat it as like an ongoing quest reward.
Mystic Mine. If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, your opponent cannot activate monsters' effects or declare an attack. If you control more monsters than your opponent does, you cannot activate monsters' effects or declare an attack once per turn during the end phase. Both players control the same number of monsters to destroy this card. Wow. So in theory, if your opponent can't actually deal with this card and you just never play a monster, could they never attack? I guess I don't know if there's like multiple attack phases. I think there's only one, right?
There's only one.
Your opponent theoretically could never attack if you never play a minion or a monster and they don't have a way to deal with this card. Just so I understand that.
They can't attack and they can never activate a monster effect.
It feels memey though. Like I don't know what you would want. Like where would you want this? Like maybe in a very like a combo oriented deck, delaying your opponent's attacks is a very big deal. And if you're playing some kind of combo deck, you probably don't play a ton of monsters. So the downside for this, at least for your side, is negligible. I think this card is like very niche. Like this feels like I would call this a tech card. Like maybe you would want this in very specific archetypes. Like, and I'm thinking more on the lines of like combo where you're going to like a bigger win condition. But I don't think this card is like inherently very powerful. I feel like there's too many effects in the game that would probably stop this from being too relevant. Or most of the time this is actually good. It's just in very niche circumstances. I'm gonna go with like, it's nichely good, but probably not great most of the time.
This card is very polarizing in the sense where it's either very, very bad or it's the best card in the game.
Damn it.
So Mystic Mine, very, very powerful effect. Your opponent literally cannot attack or activate monster effects. Instead of you just treating this as like a stall option to like accumulate resources or whatever, players will, whether they're going like, if they're going second against like a combo deck or even just any control deck that doesn't have spell or trap removal that's not focused around their monsters, if you just bait out all of their negation and you just slap this onto the board and you just never commit ever again, realistically your opponent is just gonna deck out because they're just gonna draw a card, it's not an out to Mystic Mine, pass turn, you draw a card, you just sit on your Mystic Mine, pass turn, and you do that until one player runs out of cards.
When a player runs out of cards, is the game just over?
It's not like fatigue damage. If a player decks out, they're immediately game over.
This is almost in itself a combo, right? Like it's just a one card combo where it's like you just win the game.
Yeah, just like a one card win condition half the time. Next, we've got Effect Veiler.
What are the gems in the top? Not the light black one, but like
the little star.
Yeah, what do those mean?
That's its level. The level isn't really relevant for this card.
During your opponent's main phase, quick effect. So a quick effect is you could use this on your opponent's main phase, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, think of like a quick effect as you could use it whenever.
You could send this card from your hand to the GY graveyard.
Yes.
Then target one effect monster your opponent controls to negate the effects of that face-up monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn. So you're basically sacrificing a card to negate an effect your opponent is playing.
Yes.
And because this is a quick effect, it can happen at any point in time during the game, which is actually really handy. This can almost be looked at as like a spell. You can't really counterspell this because it's a minion. I don't know if there's like a counter minion. I don't know if that's a thing.
There are cards that can negate other cards. There are sort of like quote unquote counter spells or like anti-hand traps for stuff like Effect Veiler.
Interesting. I think this card's probably pretty good though. I think the idea of this is to sacrifice a minion to stop potentially something that's going to be worse for you. Like I'd rather throw away a card to potentially live another turn than just to lose the game. Because of that philosophy, I think this card's good. Without knowing the full context of what other creature or monsters do in Yu-Gi-Oh, I would lean to the side that this card is better than bad.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This card is pretty good. So the best way to look at cards like these, we call them quote-unquote hand traps because they're like trap cards that you can like use in the hand. Usually you want to use hand traps against like sort of combo-oriented decks or against decks that are trying to resolve certain combos, and you want to use this sort of negation effect on like a very important combo piece or like an effect that sort of has to go off. And at that point, your opponent basically just usually will just end their turn because, oh, my key combo piece is negated. Well, I can't really proceed with my turn. I'm just going to pass on this very suboptimal board. And starting the turn off with 5 cards instead of the 6, but your opponent has a really weak board, is more than enough to sort of just win you the match outright.
Okay.
So far, so good. Speaking of hand traps, we've got another one. This is Max C.
What is this art? What the hell?
It's a bunch of cockroaches behind the dresser.
You could send this card from your hand to the graveyard. This turn, each time your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, immediately draw one card. You can only use this effect of max C once per turn. The above text is unofficial and describes this card's functionality.
If you ever read that, just don't worry about it. That text just doesn't exist.
This is a very niche effect. I don't know how often decks special summon, but you said that you could do it infinitely.
Yeah.
So theoretically, this card could draw you your whole deck.
Yeah.
What's the max hand size in Yu-Gi-Oh?
At the end of your own turn, you have to discard cards until you have 7 cards in your hand. But if it's not your own turn, like your opponent says you can draw like 10 cards off of this card effect, you do not have a max hand size limit.
Oh, interesting. So you would play this on your opponent's side, obviously, and then technically speaking, you could just draw a bunch of quick effects and just keep using them.
Yeah, theoretically.
That seems a lot better than I initially thought. So you could put 4 of these in your deck, you said, right?
3.
You wouldn't want to put 3 of these in your deck though, right? You would want it, like, again, this is almost like a tech card in a sense where like you would want to put this against a very specific deck, unless special summons is just something that happens in almost every single archetype. I don't know if you can answer that question for me, because that would probably really help me out here.
I'll give you a hint. Special summoning is very good.
Okay. So I imagine that a lot of decks will run it, or at least use that ability to special summon creatures. Oh my god, I don't know. I feel like this card's still pretty weak. You have to have it in your hand, and you have to have it on a turn where your opponent's going to do a lot of special summons. If your opponent does 1 special summon per turn, it's like this card's 1 for 1, doesn't feel very worth it. Maybe 2 feels good, but how long was this card in your hand for that to actually work? I don't know. I feel like this card's bad. I feel like it's not worth running. But I feel like you're about to tell me it's like the best card of the game.
I hate to disappoint you, but this is arguably the best hand trap ever printed.
Oh, okay. Oh my god. It's so, dude, I'm telling you, man, this is so hard to gauge.
Yu-Gi-Oh is almost entirely built around special summoning. Even control decks, they'll have to special summon maybe 2 or 3 times a turn. Like stuff like Sky Striker, even though that's a deck entirely built around spells, you still have to cycle through around like 2 or 3 monsters. And just having a card that either forces your opponent to basically stun lock their turn like 95% of the time, or just is forced to give you 4 or 5, like upwards of like 20, 30 cards sometimes. And some of those cards could be hand traps like Effect Veiler, a bunch of other extenders, stuff, board breakers, stuff like that. Maxi is very, very polarizing, and it's actually banned in the TCG. It's been banned for a very, very long while.
Oh.
Yeah, so this card's pretty good.
Okay. It's all right. That's all right. You know what? With each card I get wrong, I get more confident in the next card.
I'm building the confidence up. Next card, we've got another spell card, Dark Ruler No More.
Negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls until the end of the turn. Also, for the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, your opponent takes no damage. Neither player can activate monster's effects in response to this card's activation. Just so I'm clear, so when you play a monster, does that mean that you could play a monster like face down on the board?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
There's like attack position, which is like the mode where it can like attack your opponent, and there's like a defense position where it can sort of like block attacks and it uses its defense stat.
When it says face up, though, that just means the card is like, you could see what it does.
Yeah, like just
Yes.
just it's basically just face up on the board.
I'm thinking to myself, why would I want to play this card? It's not an instant though, so you would have to have this card already in play, I think, right? Is that how it works for spell cards? It has to be in play, then you can flip it, or you just play it?
No, you can just play them straight from the hand.
Negating, I guess, the effects of all face-up monsters is good, but your opponent takes no damage. Like, you would play this on your opponent's... Wait, maybe you would play this on your turn, actually. Wait a minute. That might actually be more important.
I'll give you a quick little hint, because I think you might be thinking about this card a little bit off.
Oh, no?
You can only activate this card on your own turn.
So this card, like, you would only want to use it when you're trading into minions. Like, you would only use this in certain contexts where you want to kill monsters without potentially killing your own monsters because of the effect that they have. I would assume that's what you're going for with this. This is crazy. Like, the wording of this effect is so wild. Why would I think if this is like a Hearthstone brain, why would I want this? Like, how good is it to negate effects? Like, silences are good, but they're so niche in Hearthstone. So I don't know how, especially because it's so fast in Yu-Gi-Oh, but maybe that's makes it even better. I'm thinking way too hard about this card. I feel like this card's like on the weaker side. Like I feel like in Hearthstone, I wouldn't want to run this card. I would have to have a very specific purpose for me to run this card. And I feel like against a lot of the decks you're going to go against, this isn't probably worth running.
This card is pretty good, actually, unfortunately.
No, it's interesting because I think you giving me spell cards before you show me a lot of creature cards is really making me undervalue how good effects are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I need to see more like creature cards to really evaluate this card, I guess, if that makes sense.
The main reason why I'm not showing you monsters is because half of these have like essay style text. Let me pull up a card for you real quick. This is like a pretty good approximation of what like a creature is like in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Oh, what the
Yeah, this card was like relevant, so everyone had to learn what this card did.
Dude, what is the, okay, blue gem, red gem, what's going on here? What?
Yu-Gi-Oh's a different breed.
You can remove 6 spell counter. I don't even know what a spell counter is. Special summon this card from the, okay, you know what? I'm not even gonna bother reading that thing. What the?
Here's like an easier example of like what a normal card in Yu-Gi-Oh is.
Baron de Fleur. Once per turn, you can target one card on the field, destroy it. Once while faced up on the field, when a card effect is activated, quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do destroy that card, you can only use the Holy moly, man. You know what? Both these cards really makes me appreciate Hearthstone now.
Oh my god, I know that feeling.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah, now that you show me like just these 2 cards, Dark Ruler becomes a lot better after reading that card.
Yeah.
So
I probably should have led with one of these.
You're good.
Dark Ruler is very, very good against basically any combo deck because you just slap this down, and because they can't even activate like a monster negate in response to it, their entire board is just offline, and you could basically just like spend those other 5 cards in your hand just doing your own combo. And even though you're not really killing them, you basically just disassemble their board, and then you have your own board set up, and your opponent's basically just out of resources, so they're playing very from behind.
Now that you say it like that, it makes this card look a lot better. Yeah, that makes a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
No, you're definitely right.
It's not like broken into every board. Like you're not gonna use this against like a control deck, but against combo it's very, very good. Let's go to the next card. We're gonna do a one with a whole lot less text. It's called Time Seal.
Trap card. So does a trap card only get activated on your opponent's turn?
So a trap card, you have to set it for at least 1 turn. After that 1 turn, whenever you can meet its activation requirements, or if it doesn't have one, you could just activate it whenever you want.
Okay, so I play this card, my opponent does their turn, on my next turn it's activated.
You can activate this on like your opponent's turn. So like
okay,
yeah.
Okay. Skip the draw phase of your opponent's next turn. So the draw phase is just them drawing a card from their deck, right?
Yeah, for like the start of their turn.
And once that single card is drawn, is the draw phase over?
You can activate like other trap cards if you want. You could play like quick play spells, quick effects, whatever.
Okay. How relevant is skipping a draw for 1 card from you? Hearthstone, is it worth playing a card to skip your opponent's next draw? Maybe, actually. That might actually be worth it. Less resources. It's also the card they're gonna have to draw next turn, and maybe they don't want it. This card does have a lot of benefits, but it's also a card in your, like you're trading 1 for 1. So the thing with Yu-Gi-Oh though is like you could technically skip your opponent's draw 3 times if you have all 3 of these cards, which is very funny.
I'm gonna give you a little hint because I think you might have a little bit of a wrong impression of this card.
Okay.
As soon as you end your turn and pass your opponent immediately will enter their draw phase.
Right. So you would have to use this like the following turn, right? Is that what I'm assuming?
Yeah.
It's like a 1 turn delay of skipping your opponent's draw in a sense.
Yes.
Which again, like I don't know if that's good. Maybe it is insane, but like I feel like at least from playing Hearthstone and playing some Runeterra at this point, I don't know if skipping my opponent's next draw is worth putting this card in my deck. So on that logic, I'm gonna go with this card is not great, but I am ready for you to tell me this card's insane.
Yeah, this card is really, really bad. This card is miserable.
Oh, thank God. Oh my God. You almost baited me there. I thought you were gonna say it's good.
When you think of this card, it basically does nothing on your opponent's turn. You flip this card, and they're like, okay, cool, this is relevant for like for someone who isn't me right now. This is relevant for future me. Even though you skip 1 draw phase, in Yu-Gi-Oh, like we mentioned earlier, like you have you might have enough resources in hand just played all over the course of your own turn. You might have enough resources set up in graveyard that unless you're in a very simplified game state, top decks won't really matter overall that much. in the later stages of the game.
Yeah, so it's also like worse as the game goes on in a sense. Yeah, that's also another factor I was considering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this card. Okay.
Yeah,
This card felt weird. Okay, thank God. Thank God. You're so in my head, dude, that I was gonna say that was a good card.
Got another trap card.
Waking the Dragon. What is that art? Oh my God. If this set card, what is this set card? Is that like this?
Like you set a trap card.
Okay, if you set this trap card and its owner's control has left the field because of an opponent's effect, it is now in the graveyard or banished. You could special summon one monster from your deck or an. Oh, wow. That is crazy cool. If I remember correctly, so you put a trap card face down on the board.
Yes.
And then your opponent can interact with that trap card even though it's face down, right?
Yeah, like if they have something like a mystical space typhoon and they target and destroy the Waking the Dragon can activate and special summon from your deck or extra deck.
Yeah, this is like the ultimate bait card right here.
Yeah. This is the definition of bait.
How do you even evaluate this? Like, it's obviously insane if you get it to work. But how often does your opponent want to interact with a trap card that is face down? Like, how often would they be like, I want to get rid of that trap card right now? God, this card is this card is really cool. Like, it's really cool, but I think it's bad. Like, I think this is a horrible card. Like, this might be the worst card you've shown me. Like, I feel like if I saw it, knowing this card is in the game and I saw a trap card face down, I'd be like, I'm not touching that until I see what it does. Because like this could lose you the game if you just interact with it. Like, I don't know how great one special summon could be, but it has to be very powerful. So I'd be like very cautious to interact with trap cards. So I'm gonna think it's the worst card you showed me so far.
This card is, yeah, absolutely miserable. It is really, really bad.
Like, I think of this in Hearthstone. If I saw this card played, like obviously there's no trap card in Hearthstone, but if I saw this card played, I would immediately be like, if that's in the deck and I interact with it, I'm gonna lose. And if it so happens to be that card, it's just a dead card in their deck if I never interact with it. So it just feels like it's bad. It's a lose-lose for the player playing it.
If you want to play it, like, you just shouldn't, but if you really do, you can maybe slot it into a deck that is very focused around trap cards, like something like Ultrageist, and your opponent might be like, okay, I want to put in a lot of board clear, stuff that just completely blows out the back row, and then they hit like Waking the Dragon by accident. They're like, oh no, and like you just summon like a big boss monster out of your extra deck that you just put in there because just for hoping that Waking the Dragon goes off. But 99% of the time, your opponent isn't just going to be blind sniping back row. They're very much just going to be like, oh, if it's going to go off, it's going to go off. And 99% of the time, Waking the Dragon will just never go off.
Secrets are almost like trap cards in Hearthstone. That's pretty much like what it is.
We're doing good so far. You're not doing bad. Next, we've got this guy. He's got a lot of text, so...
Masterpiece, the true Draco Slaying King, or Draco Slaying, one of those. It's a tribute summon is when you sacrifice other minions to summon this, right?
Yes.
You tribute summon this card face up. You could tribute continuous spell traps you control. Oh, so that effect is actually really interesting. So you could sacrifice trap cards to summon this card. Maybe, yo, dude, hold on. Big brain thought. You take Waking the Dragon, absolute garbage. You use it with this card to sacrifice. That actually has a use case.
That's not how it works. Hold on, let me bring up like a quick example.
Oh, damn it.
A continuous spell or trap card is a card that has this little icon, like the little infinity sign, and it's basically just when you activate it, it just stays on the board until it's removed by like a card effect or whatever.
Okay. Wait, unaffected by the effects of cards with the same card type, monster, spell, and or slash trap as the original card type of the cards tributed for its tribute summon. Once per turn during either player's turn, if you control this tribute summon monster, you could banish one continuous spell slash trap card from your graveyard and then target one other card on the field, destroy it. Yeah, what is that? What does that whole sentence mean?
So let's say that like I tribute a monster and a spell card in order to summon it. This card is basically immune from both monster effects and spell effects. So I guess the best way in Hearthstone would be like something like Raid Boss Onyxia. Would you have a Whelp? And even if you have like a Code of Cold, Onyxia won't even be frozen by it. It won't even take damage from it.
Oh, okay. Wow. So you could pick between monster, spell, or trap to be unaffected by from this monster. Wow, that is. Whew.
You could still run it over by battle. It's not like perfectly translated to Hearthstone, but from like the effects, it's perfectly just protected.
So it can still die from getting attacked from another monster, but the effect of a monster can't actually affect this.
Yes.
So the card's already in your graveyard, and then you just banish it, and then you get to destroy one other card on the field, and that could be any card on the field.
Yeah, pretty good.
Oh man, I mean, first glance, this card seems insane. Now, how much is this a bait is the question.
What have I ever baited you?
Yeah, true, dude. Yeah. Can you tell me, like, the attack and defense, is that like good stats for the cost? I need to know like what the average attack and defense would be, if you can answer that. Obviously, YuGiOh is ridiculous.
These are pretty good stats.
Okay, let me think of this in Hearthstone terms, because it feels like it's working out. If I could sacrifice a secret and a minion to summon a card like this, and then get that bonus effect afterwards, it seems insane. Like that card, like that's a must kill card. And if you could do a spell, it's arguably even better, because then they can't even interact with it with spells. Like maybe this effect isn't as good as I'm making it seem. Like this card becomes actually not that great if you don't have a spell / trap card in your graveyard. Like you need those in your graveyard for this card to continuously being very good. But you would obviously run this in a deck where I think you would where you would run those cards. Like at least from your graveyard, like you probably get to do at least one. You get one effect of this guaranteed. Maybe even a second one, depending on what you have on your board. And it only gets better if you have more of these cards. Like, I feel like this card's fine. Like, this card's fine. I wouldn't say it's, like, amazing. But there is a limit on how good this card could be. I wouldn't say it's, like, one of the best monsters in the game.
You were so close to greatness.
Is it insane?
It's insane.
Oh, God. See, I'm in my head, dude.
I was so ready to pop off with you. And then you baited yourself into thinking this card's bad. And
Dude,
like,
I'm
no.
telling you, you're in my head. It's over, dude.
My sweet summer child.
All right, you don't have to explain why this card's good. I know why this card's good. I'm just in my head. Oh, no.
The best way I could just describe why this card is good in like one sentence is you're against a trap-focused deck, and you tribute a trap. Congratulations, their entire deck can literally do nothing against you anymore.
Yeah, no, you're right. No,
Yeah, it's just,
right.
Oh well, can't out my big guy. Game 2. Next, YuGiOh.
All right, so this is a creature. This card cannot be special summoned. This card returns to its owner's hand during the end phase of the turn it is normal summoned or flipped face up. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, they skip their next draw phase. When it says inflicts battle damage to your opponent, does that mean it has to attack them directly, or is it like, does it also work with monsters?
If there's like a 100 attack like monster on the board and like YuGiOh punches into it, like that'll, like the difference is 100, they'll take 100 and that'll be battle damage.
So if this card has if there's any minion on the board, this card is like basically just a small dude. Is this bad? This has to be bad. This feels so niche. Like we have cards like this in Hearthstone. Like if you get the effect, yeah, it's awesome. But like how likely are you to get the effect? Also, if you do not draw this in like your opening hand, this card is probably absolute garbage. I'm gonna go with bad. Please tell me it's bad.
Yeah, this card sucks.
Thank God.
Finally, he got one.
This card was in Hearthstone. This one C play. Like this is awful.
Yeah, this card is really bad. It used to be very, very good because in YuGiOh, there was a card called Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End, and you could summon it, and what you would do is you would pay 1,000 life points, and you would nuke both players' boards and their hands. Like, they would just completely be gone. And what you could do is, if you had a card called Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest, when those cards died and were sent to the graveyard, you could search a monster with a pretty low stat total, and that monster would just be YuGiOh. And you would just normal the YuGiOh, and because your opponent had no cards on the field or in the hand, you would just poke in with YuGiOh. They can't draw anything. YuGiOh bounces the hand. Next turn you draw, just summon a YuGiOh, poke, and you just repeat that infinite cycle, and you just YuGiOh lock them.
We have a card like that in Hearthstone. It's like a peasant almost. It's like 1 mana.
Oh yeah, the card like draws a card or something, right?
Yeah, but like that card is just straight up better than this one because you don't actually have to attack. Like you just get the card as long as it's alive. This is like denying your opponent, but you have to be able to hit face, which is another requirement on top of that, which feels awful. I thought Hearthstone went through power creep. Look at I'm still fucking baffled.
YuGiOh's light speed facade of what it once was. Speaking of power creep, we got this girl.
Appaloosa.
Appaloosa.
2+ monsters with different names except tokens.
If you want to summon her out of the extra deck, you need to use 2 or more monsters. Their quote-unquote link rating has to equal 4. So if you have a link 3 monster and just like any other monster, you could soup them up into Appaloosa because that's 2+ monsters, or you could just use 4 completely normal monsters because 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 4.
You can only control one of these. The original attack of this card becomes 800 times the number of link materials used for its link summon. Once per chain. Sorry, what's once per chain? What is that?
Let's say I activate Pot of Greed. If you want, you can quote-unquote use a card in response to it.
When your opponent activates a monster quick effect, you can make this card lose exactly 800 attack, and if you do, negate the activation. So this, I noticed that this has an attack, but it doesn't have like a life. It has like a link -4. What does that mean?
That's just the link rating. That's just these quote-unquote like summoning requirements.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this card can never be in like defense mode. It has to be in attack.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Holy moly. So times the number of link materials used for this?
Yes.
So this card could get like an insane amount of attack if it really wants to.
If you want,
Wow,
you can have up to 3,200, which is pretty good.
When you lose the 800 attack, it loses it forever, right? It doesn't get it back?
Yeah, like it loses it permanently.
Would you say that summoning this card is hard?
For decks that want to summon this card, it's pretty easy.
I don't know. This card seems like it seems good. So in Hearthstone, would I lose attack off a creature to negate an effect from a creature? Yeah, I think I would actually. And because it's a quick effect, you could use this on your opponent's side too, right? Or, sorry, your opponent's turn, right?
Yes.
I think this card's good. I don't know how much -800 attack really means to this card, but I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that bad to lose 800 attack to negate your monster's effect, knowing some of the monsters that you showed me. So I would feel like this card's at least decent to good.
This card's pretty good.
God.
When it came out, it was one of the best Link monsters. But over time, it's gone from like really good to just like pretty good. But it's still very good because obviously, even just negating like 2 monster effects for just like 1 monster on the board, that's still pretty good considering that a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh is very combo monster effect oriented. And even though theoretically they could just lower your attack points and just like run it over in the battle phase and combo, if you have enough stuff backing that up, like you have like other monster negates, or you have like maybe some trap cards set, yeah, Appaloosa is just really good for getting you over to your next turn and just making your opponent completely blanked out.
Interesting. Okay. Oh my God. I was close to saying this card was bad.
If you called it bad, I would have left the room immediately. You got a card, it's a bit simpler. I'm sure you will get this one, hopefully.
Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon. This is what Blue Eyes turned into? Damn.
This man goes hard.
You could ritual summon this card with Chaos Form. Okay, what is Chaos Form?
Think of it as like tribute summoning, but instead of having to like normal summon and use monsters on your field, you can instead use a spell card and tribute monsters from whatever location, usually from your hand or field, up to the levels that equal or exceed the monster you're summoning. So for Chaos Max Dragon, basically send 8 or more levels of monsters from your hand or field to the graveyard, summon this guy.
Must be ritual summoned. Your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. Also, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict double piercing battle damage. So I'm assuming that's like trample, where like it does damage to your opponent's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it attacks a minion defense, this goes to, I guess in theory, 8,000 attack. Is that what it works? And then the rest of it just goes to your opponent, the opponent's face.
Yeah, that's basically the easy way to think about it.
So basically, if you like this is almost like Exodia. Like if you summon this, like how are you losing the game here? Like that's a lot of resources to summon a card though. Holy man! If this card was in Hearthstone, would it see play? I gotta keep asking myself that. Would I play a card that said if I attack a minion, it gets double the attack and it does the rest of the card damage to face? Depends on how much mana. I would assume they would have rush because you said there's some summoning cycles in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah, basically every card in Yu-Gi-Oh has charge.
Like, I mean, if that was in Hearthstone, like that's nuts. So the question I guess it really comes down to is how likely are you to actually summon this minion and how often is that summon going to win you the game? Which is hard to judge. Maybe you can summon this card on turn 1. I have no idea. And if that's the case, this card is insane. This card could win you the game, like straight up. Like even if you're like losing the game and you just can summon this potentially you just win. Like this is a win condition. Like you win the game from this card. So if you could build a deck around it, then it's probably good. Like it's either this card's good or it's just absolute trash and you can never play it. It's somewhere. It's one of those. It's not like in between. There's no way this card's in between. So I'm gonna go with it's probably good.
It is really bad.
No, see, I knew it. It's one of the two.
In a vacuum, it seems very good. Like, it's a big stat total, it's got protection, it's relatively easy to summon because a ton of cards and archetypes, like, based around ritual summoning. So, like, getting to this card is never really the problem. And yeah, you are correct in which, like, it can be a win con because you just punch over something with, like, basically 0 defense and, like, you just double the damage and you basically just, like, kill them in one shot, which is really, really good. But unfortunately, the problem is, 1, your opponent could just interrupt the combo pieces needed to summon the card. They could stop the ritual spell needed to summon the card. And even if you manage to stick it onto the board, you have to hope to kill them in one shot, because there are enough cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are either just bigger than Chaos Max Dragon or can remove it without targeting. It's pretty unfortunate, but this is sort of like the bait card for like new players.
It hurts even more because I said this card's either like really good or it's really bad. There's no in between.
I wanted to believe that you would see through my lies and deceit. We've got this guy. He is a fusion monster. Have fun reading the text.
Thunder Dragon Colossal. Sick artwork. Thunder Dragon plus 1 Thunder Monster. So that's what it means by a fusion?
That's the fusion requirements. Like you need to use Thunder Dragon plus a Thunder Monster as the materials.
Must be either fusion summon or special summon during a turn a Thunder Monster's effect was activated in the hand. Okay, by tributing 1 Thunder effect non-fusion monsters in brackets in case which you don't use polymersion. Cards cannot be added from the main deck to your opponent's hand except by drawing them. If this card would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish 1 Thunder Monster from your graveyard instead. When you sacrifice a minion to summon this, that card just goes into the graveyard anyways, right?
Yep.
So this card has 2 lives. How relevant is that? So in Hearthstone, like you could discover cards, right? You can generate cards into your hand. What other ways of is that something you can do in YuGiOh? Can you generate cards?
Basically, YuGiOh's got a ton of effects that basically just search cards from your deck.
That effect's pretty good then. That's like a huge effect to have in the game. And the fact that it has 2 lives is even more frustrating. Man, it's really hard to evaluate how good this card is. 2 lives on a creature like this is very powerful. Like it seems very powerful. So I my only part of this I don't really understand, obviously without giving context, is just how hard is this to actually get into the battlefield? And God, I'm gonna imagine that if you're gonna put this into your deck, you can do this pretty often. And this card actually gets better the more monsters you have in your Thunder monsters you have in your graveyard. Because theoretically, it could have more than 2 lives. It could keep going as long as you have them in your graveyard. This card's probably good. That effect seems insane. That's nuts. This can't be bad. Even if you say it's bad, I'm not believing you.
This card is broken. Yeah, this card is like banned.
Let's go. Okay.
The best way I could describe this card in like Hearthstone terms is the only way your opponent can add cards to their hand is by drawing them. Like they can't discover, they can't dredge, they can't delve, they can't do anything like that. For like a lot of decks, it's just game winning. You just sit on this card, and in a deck specifically built around Colossus, like Pure Thunder Dragon, where you could just load your graveyard up with a ton of Thunder monsters, and when those cards are banished, those for protecting Colossus, they actually generate additional resources. It just gets completely out of hand.
It seems like the cards that are banned in YuGiOh are just the ones that when you get them, you just win.
Half of them are just like win cons in themselves, and the other halves are like pieces to the whole. We got Fairy Tale Snow.
It's so funny how you link me this huge dragon, like ginormous, and then I get whatever, like I get this.
You get this little squirrel girl.
If this card is normal or special summoned, you could target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. Change it to face-down defense position. If this card is in your graveyard, quick effect, you can banish 7 other cards from your hand, field, or graveyard. Special summon this card. The first thing is like, how good is it to change a monster to face down in defense position? If a monster has 0 defense and it goes into defense position, does it just die? Or like you still have to hit it, I'm guessing,
You
right?
still have to hit it.
I actually didn't ask this question. I should have asked this earlier. If you have a 0 health monster or defense monster and you have another monster on the board, right? And you kill the 0 defense zero defense monster, does it do any damage or what happens?
If it's attack into attack, like let's say Colossus versus Snow. If Colossus attacks Snow, and they're both in attack position, the difference is dealt. But if Snow's in defense position, then Snow will just absorb all the damage. But if something like Chaos Max attacks Snow, where it specifies it as piercing, then or like trample or whatever, then the difference will be dealt.
So defense position, there is no trample unless it says otherwise.
Yes, but I'll give you a hint. Monsters that are face down on the field, they cannot be used for link summoning.
To be honest, I don't know how much that helps.
Yeah.
The fact that you did bring that up means that this effect is at least better than I thought it was going to be. So the second part of this is very interesting. Like, can banish 7 other cards. I mean, so it says you can, but that means you have to banish 7 other cards to special summon this card, right?
Yeah, if you want to bring it back, you have to get rid of 7 cards.
Oh my God, I don't know. This is an interesting card. I'm leaning towards it's weaker than good? I don't know though. I think this is bad. So I'm gonna go with like this card's average. I would normally say this card's not great, but because you said that one line, I'm gonna go with this card's like average.
This card's like super good.
Oh my god.
The best way I could describe it in like Hearthstone terms is that Fairy Tale Snow basically just makes a monster dormant for a turn.
So you got to explain to me more now that you said that. Why is this good in Yu-Gi-Oh then? I guess the effect of cards in maybe that's my problem. I keep underestimating how powerful cards are in Yu-Gi-Oh.
The easiest way to explain is the fact that it's a quick effect to summon it. And whenever it's summoned, whether it's on your turn, your opponent's turn, you get to make something dormant.
You say that, right? But banishing 7 other, like, again, you're right. I'm not saying you're wrong. Like, you're the Yu-Gi-Oh guy here. But in Hearthstone, like, man, banishing 7 other cards to do this is like, you'd be an idiot. Like, there's no way you're doing that. Like, to just dormant a minion to lose 7 cards, like, you probably lost the game from this effect. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, obviously the graveyard mechanic matters a lot here. Like, this is a huge aspect of this card, and I just really underestimate how powerful it is. But you're right. I can see why this card is good now that you say it like that.
It's not once per turn, and usually, like, you may think that like it's a super heavy graveyard cost, and you are right about that. But if you sort of build your deck around cards that want to be banished, or you have like just a bunch of like really bad like cyclers that like once they're in the graveyard you don't care about, you just like banish those and you just go like plus infinity at that point. Last card. That grass looks greener.
The names of these cards. Okay, that grass looks greener. If you have more cards in your deck than your opponent does, send cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard so you have the same number of cards in your deck as the... What the hell? That is extremely interesting. Wow. The thing is that you've already told me that the graveyard is very good. Like, yes. It seems like it's a very good mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! You're obviously putting into a deck where you're putting this with more cards in your deck just to begin with. Like, that seems like the obvious approach here. Like, I played this and I just put so many cards in my graveyard. That's probably really beneficial to me. So then this card's probably good.
Yeah, this card's wild. It's pretty good. You put grass in a deck where you just have like a billion effects that want to be activated in the graveyard. 60 cards, you hit the button, you mill like 30 cards and you just win the game.
Dude, I don't even know, man. Like, I know I didn't do, like, I assumed I was going to do this bad because just looking at Yu-Gi-Oh cards from like when I was a child, I just didn't understand what the hell they were. And
I couldn't read yet.
But yeah, like it's wild. I'm Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Yu-Gi-Oh's hard. I feel like literally when people say Hearthstone is a children's card game, I now understand what they mean because when I look at these cards.
I remember like when I transitioned from like Hearthstone to Yu-Gi-Oh, I was like, oh, this game is just like a slightly more difficult Hearthstone, right? I take a look at like 1/6 Samurai card, like my mind melts and I just die.
Honestly, it's like I went to a math test and I didn't study at all. Like, I'm just trying to like put the pieces together and hope I get some part marks on this.
If 1 + 1 = 2, then what the hell is this derivative?